In the ninth hour, as shadows lengthened and the sun dimmed, the earth bore witness to a moment that would forever alter the course of history. Upon the rugged beams of the cross, Jesus of Nazareth, forsaken and wearied, surrendered his spirit into the hands of the Father. In that solemn breath, the veil of the temple, a barrier between the divine and the mortal, was torn asunder, signifying a new covenant, a doorway into God's presence. The ground trembled, the rocks split, and the heavens wept, as creation itself mourned the death of the Son of God. This was no ordinary moment. It was the culmination of love's greatest sacrifice, a beacon of hope and redemption for all humanity.
Well, I got pulled over the other day. Glad you think that's funny. Yeah, it was 9:30, 10 o'clock at night. I'm driving down Woodlands Parkway. Got my twin boys with me. We're leaving a late baseball practice. Just trying to get home. I didn't think I was doing anything crazy wrong. I mean, just kind of going with the flow of traffic, left-hand side there on Woodlands Parkway. And you know, it's dark. We're just chatting about baseball and life. And then all of a sudden, the lights come on. You know what I mean, right? I mean, it just stops everything. The conversation ends. I mean, you tense up, and at that point, I'm like, man, what am I going to do? What have I been doing? I mean, there's a bunch of brake lights that flashed in front of me when they saw the lights, so I'm thinking maybe we're all speeding. I don't know. At that point, I'm like, maybe he's just wanting to go get a bad guy, and I'm just going to get out of his way, but I guess I was the bad guy because he kept following me over every lane. I didn't know there's not a shoulder on Woodlands Parkway, so do I just take up the right lane? That's what I did. He seemed to be fine with it. He comes up, I shut down the car, and then I get my license out, and he comes up, and nice guy from the Montgomery Sheriff's Police Department says, hey, you have a tail light out on your passenger side. I was like, good, because I was thinking the 65 and a 45 wasn't going to go so well. Just kidding. So I'm like, oh man, that's all it is. And so I give him my license, and he goes back to make sure, you know, the car is not stolen, that I don't have a warrant out for my arrest. You should all rest assured I'm here. Everything's good. I passed the background check. And he came back and he gave me the license. And at that moment, you know, you're sitting out there, cars are flying by. Every light on his cruiser is pointed at me. We're not really talking. The twins are kind of in shock of what is going on with Dad. And he comes back and says, hey, Mr. Johnson, just going to give you a warning on that taillight and have a great rest of the evening. And I said, man, I will. Thank you very much. And just to update the story, it took me a week or two, but I got the taillight fixed. I am completely legal now. You know what happens when those lights come on, right? I mean, it just grabs your attention. I mean, it shuts everything down. It's a whole person response. And I think that's what it's designed to do. It's got this physiological response to it, that your heart starts racing and some adrenaline starts pumping, like you grab the wheel a little heavier and harder. You're like, oh man, what's going on? And then not only that, but there's the psychological response. My mind was alert. Normally I'm done by 9 o'clock in the evening. So for this thing to be close to 10 o'clock, I'm already starting to shut down. But when the lights come on, I'm alert. I'm trying to figure out what have I done, looking at the speedometer, checking things out. And then not only that, but you have an emotional response, because then it hits you, man, I might be paying a $150, $200 ticket. I don't want that. Maybe you get a little grumpy about it, sad about it, mad about it. Some of us have a spiritual response. While we're waiting for the officer to come from his vehicle to ours, we're praying and saying, Lord, if you'll get me out of this, I'll go on the mission field. And Jesse Marcos, who's our missions pastor, would love to have that conversation with you. He's right over there. Just say, I need to make good on a promise. Whatever it is, it's a whole person response. And then when he finally gives your license back and you can go back on the road, it takes a minute for your heart to slow down, for your mind to start racing, like your emotions have to level out, like, oh, good, I'm not going to have to pay a fine. All of that takes place in that short little 10 to 15 minute window. It's the idea that it grabs your attention. It demands a response. You got to pull over. You need to get your license out. You need to do these things. It's calling for you to focus. It's a lot like an elementary school teacher who puts her hand in the air and one finger over her lips and says, 1, 2, 3, all eyes on. Yeah, right? You get it. There's one who knows that really well. It might be like a judge in a courtroom who, as the chatter begins to grow, bangs the gavel and says, man, order, I need you to respond, quit the side conversations right here. Or it might be like the manager at a retail store who comes over the loudspeaker and says, shoppers, can I have your attention, please? And maybe it's to tell you that there's a young man or woman who's lost mom or dad, or there's a special on aisle 9, or we're fixing to close here in a minute, but I need your attention. Something's got to stop. There demands a response. I need you to focus here. We enter into Easter season, and I believe that God wants our attention. I believe He wants our attention more than just for a few weeks. But we celebrate Easter one time a year, so it seems like this would be a really good place to start as we think about God saying, can I have your attention, please? Can I have all eyes on me? When you think about 2,000 years ago and you think about the cross of Jesus Christ and what happened in those 3 days, they are the most significant days in the history of the world. They changed the course of humanity. And you would think in and of themselves that they would draw all of our attention. You would think that everyone would be front and center, attention is given. I mean, just think about it. A crucifixion. I mean, my guess would be as if I said, hey, next week there's a crucifixion that's going to happen at the Cynthia Woods Pavilion. You would all be like, really? Some of you'd read about it. Maybe hoping it was live streamed. Some of you might even go because it's so out of the ordinary. It's so graphic. It's like there's no way that would take place. And so a crucifixion in and of itself, you would think would grab your attention. I mean, nails in hands and feet. The idea that you would be hung and your flesh just exposed to nature on this wooden beam. I mean, that in and of itself should just grab our attention. But 2,000 years ago, it wouldn't be uncommon, depending on the time, that Rome might crucify 100, 200 in the course of days. Just another one. Just another guy got on the wrong end of Rome, and he's gone. But what about when you add to crucifixion the fact that this was the long-awaited Messiah? I mean, this is the guy that just a week prior comes into town riding on a colt, and everybody's got these branches saying, Hosanna, and they seem to be worshiping. As a matter of fact, the leader's saying, no, don't worship this guy. And he's like, oh, yeah, you better worship. Because the rocks are going to cry out if they don't. And it seems weird that this man who drew such a following that he was hoped for, but somehow the expectations got messed up. And so because he wasn't going to overthrow Rome or bring about some military revolt, it just kind of waned through the week. And this just ended up being another Messiah that just got crucified. I mean, that Rome has seen this before. But then, the fact that it's not just any old Messiah, the fact that this is Jesus. I mean, for 3 years, the man that is going to be put on the cross, this is the man who, he did stuff like, take up your mat and walk. And a man took up his mat and walked. Like, that should have your attention. You don't crucify that guy, do you? You don't crucify the guy that gives sight to the blind. You don't crucify the guy that goes out to the marginalized and the poor and the neglected and the weak. You don't go to the guy, you don't crucify the guy who stands up to the religious elite who has got his thumb on the people. You don't crucify the guy that can take a withered hand and say, outstretch it and it comes out. You don't crucify a guy who feeds thousands with 5 loaves and 2 fish. You don't crucify a guy who says, Lazarus, come on out of the grave, and a guy does it. Right? I mean, that's not the guy. I mean, maybe if it was just crucifixion, and maybe if it was some wannabe Messiah, but Jesus had all of the proof in the pudding. He is who he says he is. And what's amazing to me is 2,000 years ago when he hung on that cross, I think God picked up that loudspeaker for the universe and he says, can I have your attention, please? Can I have your attention, please? This is no ordinary man. Let me show it to you in Matthew chapter 27. Matthew records this event and he adds detail to it that is, it is clear that God is saying, I need your eyes here. I need everyone's attention here. Let's start in verse 45. Now, from the 6th hour, darkness fell upon the land until the 9th hour. So at noon, this darkness falls on the land till the 9th hour, which is 3 o'clock. So clearly I have fast forwarded our way to this point in the story. Jesus went on the cross around 9 a.m. in the morning. It goes dark at noon, and then the 9th hour, it's all going to end. And so he's been on the cross now for 3 hours. While he's been on the cross, he's been mocked. I mean, this is the point where they drove the spikes in his hands and his feet. You know the story well, right? That's the danger of this story, is that we know it so well that we almost lull ourselves into sleep and just forgetting that it demands our attention. And so we get to this place where Jesus has been humiliated, he's been beaten, he's been going through this amazing amount of pain and anguish. He's got a sign above him. It says, King of the Jews, just to mock him even more. And then all of a sudden, when the sun is supposed to be at its height, at the apex of the day, like at noon, it just goes dark. Now from the 6th hour, darkness fell upon the land until the 9th hour. For 3 straight hours, it got dark. Can I have your attention, please? It doesn't go dark for anyone else. It goes dark for this man. We'll talk more about darkness on Good Friday. Let's keep going. About the 9th hour, Jesus cried out with a loud voice, saying, Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani. That is, my God, why have you forsaken me? In the middle of this darkness where no one can see, and Jesus is just in this veil of this shadow of this darkness, golly, he can feel the weight of sin, he can feel the weight of evil, he can feel the weight of this separation from his Father, and he cries out, why have you forsaken me? That's a sermon in and of itself. Verse 47. And some of those who were standing there when they heard it began saying, this man is calling for Elijah. And immediately one of them ran, and taking a sponge, he filled it with sour wine and put it on a reed and gave him a drink. But the rest of them said, let us see whether Elijah will come and save him. Let us see if Elijah will come and save him. Like, listen, it is dark. Do you not understand miraculous? Do you not understand supernatural? Like at that moment, shut your mouth, right? God will go to great lengths to grab our attention. And some of us will still miss it. Then he says this. Verse 49, let's see, whether Elijah will come and save him. Verse 50, and Jesus cried out again with a loud voice, and he yielded up his spirit. We know from the other Gospels that this is where he says, "It is finished," and he cries out. It's dark. I don't even know who's still there. His boys aren't there. We know that, save one. In the middle of that darkness, he willingly yields his life. He obediently gives his life. He says, "It is finished." Like, I came to the planet to pay for sin, to die for people, to demonstrate God's love, that while we were all still sinning, Christ died for us. And then he just willingly doesn't fight for another second. He doesn't try to grasp one more breath. He says, this needs to happen, and it is finished. And listen, if the text ended there, it's enough. If the text ends there, it's enough. If we don't get what happens next, listen to me. The reality that Jesus was the God-man sent from heaven to live a perfect life, to die for the sins of humanity, and he did it on the cross and gave it up right then and there, it could end at that verse, and it's plenty. He has our attention, or he should. But God, going to great measures, wants to make sure each and every one of us know this is no mere man. This is not just some other crucifixion. This is God begging for our attention. Look at it in verse 50. And Jesus cried out again with a loud voice and yielded up his spirit, and behold, at that moment, the veil of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom. When he dies and he accomplishes that work on the cross, somewhere in Jerusalem at the temple, there's this veil that separates the Holy of Holies from the rest, that only one person can go in one time of year, and that thing rips from top to bottom, 4 inches thick. We'll talk more about it next week. But in other words, can I have your attention, please? Can you imagine what would have gone on around the temple when that thing breaks and they look in and see something they shouldn't be seeing? That's miraculous. God is trying to show us something. He says not only was the veil torn, it says, and the earth shook and the rocks were split. Can you imagine you're standing there and Jesus has just said it's finished. You're trying to just process the fact, is he dead or is he just done? Is he giving up? And then in that moment, there's some commotion happening down there in Jerusalem around the temple. And then as he says it is finished, the rocks begin to shake. Those of you that were looking down looked up, didn't you? And that's exactly what you would have done 2,000 years ago. I don't think anyone was in the back scrolling Facebook, wondering what's for lunch, when is this over? I think everyone was fully involved with what was taking place with Jesus Christ. Full and complete attention. Could feel it. Equilibrium, disoriented, ground moving, rocks splitting, like you could hear the rocks crumbling, but have you ever heard a rock pop? More on that here in a moment. We're not done yet. Verse 52, the tombs were opened, and many bodies of the saints who had fallen asleep were raised. Now we're having some fun, aren't we? Some tombs were open. The earth shakes, veil tears, it's pitch black. And then some tombs open. And not only do the tombs open, but these bodies of the saints who had fallen asleep were raised. They come back to life. Not everybody, but a few people are raised to life. Can I have your attention, please? And then it gets even better. Verse 53, and coming out of the tombs after his resurrection, they entered the holy city and appeared to many. What do you do with that? What do you do with that? That 3 days later, they just walk around, they go knock on the door, and they're like, hey! Are you alert? Are you paying attention? Are you closing the door saying, nah? And this is just Russell's translation, but this is what I think they were saying. I don't think they were catching up on the favorite sports team, what the weather was like, how are the kids these days. I think this is what they said. They said this: that guy that just got crucified is legit. That's Jesus. And he has victory over sin and death. That's the reason I'm here. Right? All eyes on God. Dark, veil, earthquake, tombs, people raised. And then it gets really good. Verse 54. Now the centurion and those who were with him keeping guard over Jesus. This is a guy who probably oversees 100 Roman soldiers. My guess is he's been on Jesus' detail, if you will, from the moment that he was going to be arrested in the Garden of Gethsemane. He showed up and he watched one of his buddies give him a kiss and betray him. He's one of the guys that made sure Jesus got to the kangaroo courts in the middle of the night with the high priest, and then went from Pilate to Herod, back to Pilate again. He's the one that heard the crowds ask for Barabbas. He's the one who heard them yell, crucify him. I'm sure in his mind he's like, what in the world? You were just saying Hosanna to this guy a week before. This guy is probably overseeing when Jesus was beaten within an inch of his life as he was flogged. I can imagine that he was part of the group that blindfolded Jesus and hit him and said, who did it? Who did it? They spat on him. Like you spit on somebody? Put a crown of thorns, purple robe, just to mock him as king. He was probably probably in charge of driving him up the hill, making sure the hands were placed just right, the feet were placed just right, the nails driven in, the sign, King of the Jews, put on the cross. He overheard all the chatter from the thieves. He allowed the guys to gamble over Jesus' clothes. And for 3 hours, it all probably was pretty normal until it went dark. And then a veil tears, and the earthquakes, and some tombs open. And verse 54 says, now the centurion and those who were with him keeping guard over Jesus, when they saw the earthquake and the things that were happening, became very frightened and said, truly this was the Son of God. That would be the last miracle. A Gentile enemy who recognizes this is more than just a mere man. In other words, he says, you have my attention. You have my attention. As we think about the familiarity of the story and we're reminded of all of these details, my hope is just that our hearts are tender just for a moment, maybe a few weeks, as terrible as that sounds, just to be really, really worshipful and grateful for what Christ has done. Let's go back to the earthquake for a moment. I think this earthquake is Obviously, it's supernatural. Earthquakes wouldn't have been unknown to that region, as there's a major fault line there. Several major earthquakes have been recorded throughout history and preserved even in the rocks. So an earthquake happening obviously would be supernatural. God uses something natural to accomplish something, but I also think this earthquake is miraculous. I think it's miraculous because of its timing. It happened right when Jesus said, "It is finished." So to me, that's miraculous and supernatural. I also think it's miraculous in that it was probably what created the cause of the veil to tear. It was probably what helped open some of those tombs. Not all tombs, but some tombs. I think it was miraculous and supernatural in that these miracles were a testimony. They didn't just happen. They weren't just another effect, but it was a testimony. It was declaring that there is something more about this man. Matter of fact, I think each miracle is a testimony. I think it reveals a little bit about who Christ is and what was accomplished when he died on that cross. So as we look at the earthquake, I'm reminded that this isn't the first earthquake that God has used. And according to Scripture, it won't be the last earthquake that God uses. So let's go back to one of the first earthquakes and maybe how they're all three of these. This earthquake, the earthquake at Sinai, and the one to come are all together. You remember the nation of Israel was enslaved to Egypt, and after 10 plagues, they were redeemed. They were brought through the Red Sea. They got water from a rock, manna from heaven, quail because they wanted meat to eat. And then God looks at them and says, here's the deal. You're going to be my people. And if you're going to be my people, I got to tell you how you're going to relate to me. Listen to that. I'm going to tell you how you're going to relate to me. And how you're going to relate to me is this. I'm going to give you the law through Moses, and when you keep this law, you are going to be a kingdom of priests. You are going to be people who are going to declare my majesty and my glory and my holiness. In other words, you're going to declare that I am the one true God to all the nations. That's what you're going to do. And so I'm going to be your God. You are going to be my people. I'm going to love you and take care of you. You're going to obey this. And in so doing, you will be a kingdom of priests. And the way this is going to go down is we're going to do it at Mount Sinai. So listen to me. I'm going to give you 3 days to get yourselves ready. 3 days. And then Moses is going to call you to the mountain. In those 3 days, I need you to wash your clothes. I need you to wash your hands. I need you to get clean. And not only that, I need you to stay away from sexual activity. I need you to be consecrated, ready to go. Because I'm going to tell you how we're going to relate. And then in Exodus 19, God says, Moses, it's time. It's the 3rd day. Listen to these words in Exodus 19, starting in verse 16. So it came about on the 3rd day when it was morning that there was thunder and lightning, flashes, and a thick cloud upon the mountain, and a very loud trumpet sound. Most of that seems pretty normal. I mean, just a thunderstorm, some lightning, a cloud, a thunder. The trumpet sounds a little weird. That one would be new, wouldn't it? But for the most part, this seems like just a natural phenomenon, nothing to get too worked up about. And it says that trumpet sound was very loud so that all the people who were in the camp trembled. The trumpet was just enough to say, this ain't an ordinary thunderstorm. And Moses brought the people out of the camp to meet God, and they stood at the foot of the mountain. It's time, I need you to come. They're like, you want us to come to that mountain with thunder and lightning and a trumpet sound? Moses is like, yep, that's what he said, come on. Verse 18, now Mount Sinai was all in smoke because the Lord descended upon it in fire. Now that's where this thing gets weird, doesn't it? He gets this fire that descends from heaven, and as it descends from heaven, it's landing on the mountain, and there's smoke, and there's thunder, and lightning, and cloud, and a trumpet sound. And its smoke ascended like the smoke of a furnace. I mean, just coming out, piping out of it. And the whole mountain quaked violently. There it is. And when the sound of the trumpet grew louder and louder, Moses spoke, and God answered him with thunder. Can I have your attention, please? I think Mount Sinai was covered in fire and smoke and lightning and thunder and this ever crescendo of a trumpet getting louder and louder. And it shook violently because it was going to declare the holiness of God. It was going to show that He is holy and we are not. So be really careful how close you get. Listen, can you hear that? Be really careful how close you get. And you're going to relate to me through this law. And then we have the earthquake at Calvary, which I think is saying, this is now how you're going to relate to me? Through my Son, Jesus Christ. That's not bad, is it? Some of you might be saying, I don't know, Russell, that seems like a long stretch from one earthquake to the other. Let me show it to you in Hebrews chapter 12, because Hebrews chapter 12 talks about the earthquakes that is to come. And he ties all three of them together. Verse 18, he says, for you have not come to a mountain that can be touched, and to a blazing fire, and to darkness and gloom and a whirlwind, and to the blast of a trumpet and the sound of words, which sound was such that those who heard begged that no further word be spoken to them. When God spoke and it clapped with thunder, they're like, we're good, we don't need to hear any more. Please. For they could not bear the command, if even a beast touches the mountain, it will be stoned. And it was so terrible was the sight that Moses said, I'm full of fear and trembling. He's talking about Sinai. He's talking about all of that moment, the quaking of the mountain, all of it, that Moses himself trembled and was terrified. But listen to this. But you have come to Mount Zion, and to the city of the living God, the heavenly Jerusalem, and to the myriads of angels, to the general assembly and church of the firstborn, those of us who are part of Jesus Christ, who is enrolled in heaven, and to God, the judge of all, and to the spirits of the righteous made perfect. He's talking about us coming to this kingdom that we can enter in, that we don't stand on the outside in fear of trembling, but we can come into it. That's pretty good, isn't it? And then he's going to tie it to Jesus here. Verse 24. And to Jesus, the mediator of a new covenant. Old covenant at Sinai, Jesus, the mediator of a new covenant, and to the sprinkled blood. Where did Jesus sprinkle his blood? On that cross. Verse 25. See to it that you do not refuse him who is speaking. For of those who did not escape when they refused him, who warned them on the earth, much less will we escape who turn away from him who warns from heaven. Can you imagine standing at Mount Sinai, seeing lightning and thunder, smoke, fire, trumpet sound, it shakes, and God speaks, and it sounds like thunder, and for you to just go, nah. Can you imagine for 3 hours it goes dark, the veil is torn, the earth shakes, tombs are open, people come out and appear. A centurion says, surely this is the Son of God, and we just kind of go, nah. It's decent. It's all right. Verse 26, and his voice shook the earth then, but now he promised, saying, yet once more I will shake not only the earth, but also the heaven. We got one coming. And this expression, yet once more, denotes the removing of those things which can be shaken, as of created things, so that those things which cannot be shaken may remain. One day there's going to be a massive earthquake that's going to shake earth and heaven, and all of this brokenness and evil and sin-cursed mess is going to fade away, and what's going to be left is the unshakable kingdom of Jesus Christ. That's really good news. So what's your response to that? What's your response to Jesus Christ when that earth shook, when he said, "It is finished"? What's your response? When the lights come on, you got to pull over. And when Jesus dies on a cross and we're reminded of it, we got to respond. Look at what he says in verse 28. Therefore, in light of this, here's our response. Since we receive a kingdom which cannot be shaken, because we've put our faith and trust in Jesus Christ and what he accomplished at the first earthquake, we will receive a kingdom at the next one. And so let us show gratitude by which we may offer to God an acceptable service with reverence and awe. In other words, he'd like to have your attention. He'd like to have your attention to worship him. He'd like to have your attention to honor him. He'd like to have your attention to serve him. That's what he'd like. So for the next few weeks, that's what we're going to try to do. Is just somehow, and listen to me, I'm really hoping this is bigger than just an hour and a half block on a Sunday morning. I'm just asking that. This is my prayer for you and for me, is that there will be awe and reverence and worship as we remember in this season the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus Christ. I'm just going to tell you how I'm praying for me, and you guys think about how you want to pray for yourselves. Every morning I get up and I read my Bible and I pray. This is what I'm asking for. I'm just asking that my heart will be tender, and then I'll just sit in it a little longer and a little more undistracted and really just say, God, what do you want me to see in here? And when I pray, that I'm not just ripping off my list. I'm just sitting in it a little bit longer. So that's my prayer for you. My prayer for you is when you come, maybe you just put do not disturb on the phone and set it down, and you just sit in it. And when you open your Bible in the morning or at night or whenever you do it, you say, man, you're worthy of me just giving you some attention right now. Before you move to the planner and the emails, I'm going to sit in this. And some of us, when we pray, we could just be quiet. Say, God, you have my attention. That's me. That's what I'm praying for. And I'm hoping the next few weeks we could just sit in the majesty that is God demonstrating his love toward us, that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. So here's the deal. I'm going to pray, and I know when I say that, everybody's like, oop, it's time to go. Can you just be still? Just be still. Band's going to come out. It's one 5-minute song. Let's sing. Let's say thank you. Let's sit and pray. Sit in the weight of what has been accomplished. Kids are going to be okay. Lunch isn't going anywhere. Sit. Father, my heart here, I'm really thankful that Easter comes around this time of year because it forces me to look back at the greatest moment ever. I'm a little ashamed that it takes this focused attention to help me to slow down, and so I'm sure I'm not alone. So as we sing about you and your Son and the praise that he is worthy of, that we would just sit in it, we would lift up our voices. Maybe we would just be quiet and let the words wash over us, that instead of being distracted about this afternoon or what's next, that we would just, for a moment, just try to be still and put our eyes on you. And then, Lord, help us just build that into our lives. Help me build that into my life. So just right where you're at in the stillness of the moment, can you prepare your heart? Say thank you. Say I love you. Be ready to worship him. Be honored, Lord. You're worthy of this 5 minutes and every other 5 minutes we could give. Amen.